There's a saying among those of us who explore the forgotten corners of the world. Take only pictures. Leave only footprints. It's a code of ethics, a mantra to respect the places that time has left behind. We treat it like a sacred text. It's the line we draw between discovery and desecration. We hold on to it because it grounds us, reminds us that we are merely visitors in a world of ghosts, ephemeral figures passing through silent histories. But what happens when the ghosts aren't just memories? What happens when the silence isn't empty? What happens when you leave footprints and something follows them back? For years, my team and I have documented our journeys for the Wilderness Protocol. We've climbed through the skeletal remains of iron factories and slipped through the silent, dust-choked wards of abandoned sanatoriums. We've mapped subterranean military bunkers and stood in the decaying grandeur of forgotten theaters. We thought we had seen it all. We thought we understood the rules of decay, the predictable patterns of nature reclaiming what man has built. We were arrogant. We were wrong. This is the story I've never told. The one that's been locked away on a corrupted hard drive, and in a corner of my mind I refuse to visit after dark. This is the story of the Blackwood Anomaly, of an abandoned research outpost that shouldn't have existed, and of the horrifying, reality-bending discovery that the power was still on. What we found there broke more than just the rules of urban exploration. It broke us. So turn down the lights. Settle in. This is going to be a long night. Our story begins not with a map or a clear objective, but with a whisper, a digital ghost. It started, as many of our expeditions do, in the deep archives of the internet, in a place most people never look. I was trawling through a defunct forum for retired park rangers and forestry workers, a site last updated in 2008. Most of the posts were about pension plans and swapping stories about wildfires in the 90s. But then I found a thread. The title was simple, The Blackwood Hum. The original post was from a user named Ranger Dave 73. It was a rambling, almost incoherent post. He talked about his time patrolling the far eastern sector of Blackwood National Park in the early 2000s. It was a vast, undeveloped tract of wilderness, designated as geologically unstable, a place where trails dissolved into impassable thickets of rhododendron and steep, granite-faced ravines. He described a phenomenon that his superiors always dismissed as tinnitus or an overactive imagination. A low, persistent hum. He wrote, and I remember the words verbatim, "It wasn't in my ears. I felt it in my teeth, in the soles of my boots. Like the whole damn mountain was purring. Some days you'd be out there, miles from anything, and you'd catch a glint of something through the trees. Something metallic. Something that shouldn't be there." I mentioned it once in an official report and was told to take a mandatory 2-week leave for stress-related auditory hallucinations. I never wrote about it again. The thread had only 3 replies. One called him crazy. The other 2 were from other former rangers, both confirming they'd experienced the same thing. One of them added another detail. He'd once found a section of old, military-grade fence deep in the woods, far from any known boundary. The post was dated 12 years ago. The account, Ranger Dave 73, was inactive. For most people, it would be nothing, a campfire story for the digital age. But for me, it was a spark. It was the beginning of an obsession. I brought it to the team, my team, the core of the Wilderness Protocol. There were 4 of us, a small, tight-knit family bound by a shared love for forgotten places. First, there was Maya. She was our tech specialist and archivist, the digital heart of our operation. She saw the world in lines of code and data trails and believed that no secret could stay buried forever in the information age. While the rest of us saw a crumbling wall, Maya saw a timeline of decay that could be analyzed. She was the one who could coax a story out of a dead hard drive or pull a blueprint from a corrupted government server. Her excitement was cerebral, a quiet intensity that burned behind her eyes when she was onto something. Then there was Chloe. She was our rock. Officially our medic and logistics expert, she was unofficially the team's conscience. She was pragmatic, relentlessly level-headed, the one who packed the extra batteries, the trauma kit, the backup water filter. She was the one who calculated the risks, the one who would pull the plug on an expedition if it got too dangerous. Her role wasn't to find the adventure, but to make sure we all came home from it. She saw the story in terms of survival. And then there was Ben, our cameraman and lead scout. Ben was kinetic energy personified. Agile, fearless, and with an artist's eye for capturing the melancholic beauty of decay. He could climb a rusted-out gantry crane as easily as I could walk up a flight of stairs, and his sense of direction was almost supernatural. He was the one who pushed us forward, always hungry for the next shot, the next discovery. He lived for the moment of revelation. And me, Liam, I'm the narrator, the planner, the one who pulls the threads of rumor and history together until they form a map. I'm the one who finds the whispers, like Ranger Dave 73's post, and tries to give them a voice. I showed them the forum thread. Ben was instantly hooked. A secret base in a national park? A mystery hum? Liam, this is the motherlode. We have to go. Maya was already typing furiously on her laptop, a cascade of search terms and command prompts filling her screen. Blackwood National Park, Eastern Sector Geological Surveys, declassified aerial photography, give me a few days, she said, not looking up. Chloe was the only one who hesitated. She read the post slowly, her brow furrowed. Geologically unstable. No access. Mandatory leave for stress. Liam, this isn't like an old factory. This place, if it's real, was deliberately hidden. And people were warned away from it. That feels different. She was right, of course. But the pull of the unknown was too strong. Maya's few days turned into 6 months of relentless, frustrating, and utterly consuming research. The digital trail was almost non-existent. There were no official records of any construction in that sector of Blackwood. No building permits, no government contracts, no land leases. It was a ghost on paper. We hit dead end after dead end. The breakthrough came from the past. Maya was digging through the archives of the U.S. Geological Survey, looking at old, digitized maps. She was cross-referencing them with declassified Corona satellite images from the Cold War, the kind that were taken with film and dropped back to Earth in buckets. It was painstaking work. I remember the night she found it. It was almost 3 a.m. The rest of us were asleep. I was woken by a ping on my phone. It was a message from Maya. Just 2 words. I found it. I went to her apartment. She was sitting in the dark, her face illuminated by her multiple monitors. On one screen was a high-resolution satellite photo from 1992. It showed nothing but a dense, unbroken canopy of trees. On the other screen was a geological survey map from 1978. And there, deep in the sector labeled geologically unstable no access, was a tiny, perfect, unlabeled square. A single man-made structure, printed in faint black ink, in a sea of topographical lines. It was there in 78, Maya whispered, her voice hoarse with fatigue and excitement. By the 90s, it's gone. The trees grew over it, or the later satellite imagery was deliberately doctored. But for a brief period, it existed on a public record. Before someone decided it shouldn't. This was our smoking gun. We now had a precise location. The planning for the expedition took another month. Chloe was adamant about safety protocols. We were going completely off-grid into an area known for its treacherous terrain. We packed for a 4-day trip, 2 days to hike in, a day for exploration, and a day to hike out. We had a satellite phone for emergencies, but we knew that rescue would be unlikely in that terrain. Our insertion point was a decommissioned fire warden's road that, according to the maps, hadn't been maintained since the early 1980s. When we got there, we found it was less a road and more a memory of one. Nature had reclaimed it with a vengeance. We left our truck hidden in a thicket of pines and began the hike. The first day was brutal but normal, a tough uphill climb through dense but ordinary forest. We camped by a stream, the sounds of the wilderness a familiar comfort. But on the second day, something changed. As we pushed deeper into the eastern sector, crossing the invisible line into the no-access zone, the forest began to transform. The trees grew closer together, their branches interlocking to form a perpetual, gloomy twilight, even at midday. The character of the woods shifted, felt older, more primal. The first thing we noticed was the silence. It wasn't just quiet. It was a profound and unsettling absence of sound. No birdsong, no chatter of squirrels, no rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. All we could hear was the rhythmic crunch of our own boots on the damp, mossy ground and the sound of our own breathing. It felt like the entire ecosystem was holding its breath. "I don't like this," Chloe said, pausing to get her bearings. "I've hiked in old-growth forests all my life. They're never this quiet. It's unnatural." The air itself felt different, heavy, damp. It carried a strange, metallic tang, like the air after a lightning storm. And then we started to feel it. It began as a subtle vibration in the soles of our boots, a low-frequency thrum that seemed to rise from the very bedrock beneath our feet. It wasn't a sound yet, more a sensation. The Blackwood hum. It was real. Maya pulled out a small, handheld EMF detector from her pack. The needle, which had been dormant, began to twitch. "Liam," she said, her eyes wide. "There's an electromagnetic field out here. A significant one." We pressed on, our excitement now tinged with a growing sense of apprehension. The forest became more alien. The trees were twisted into strange, agonizing shapes, their bark covered in weird, tumor-like burls. The leaves on the saplings were a sickly, anemic shade of yellow, despite it being the height of summer. It was on the afternoon of the second day that Ben, who was scouting about 50 yards ahead, stopped dead. He didn't call out. He just raised a single clenched fist, the signal to halt and be silent. We caught up to him, moving slowly, trying not to make a sound. He was crouched behind a massive, moss-covered boulder, and he pointed. Through a thick curtain of ancient, hanging ivy we saw it. A fence. It wasn't a farmer's barbed wire fence or the simple chain link you see around industrial sites. This was a serious, 10-foot-high barrier of oxidized, heavy-gauge steel, angled outwards at the top. And running along the top were 3 thick coils of rusted, vicious-looking concertina wire. It was military-grade, designed not just to mark a boundary, but to repel a determined assault. It had no business being here, swallowed by a forest in the middle of a national park. It was a scar of civilization in a place that had supposedly never been touched. We moved along the fence line, our hands tracing the cold, rusted metal. It stretched on, disappearing into the dense woods in both directions. After following it for nearly half a mile, we found the gate. It was just as imposing, a double gate of solid steel bars, heavy enough to stop a truck. A thick, rusted chain and a massive padlock held it shut. Bolted to the bars was a faded, metal sign, ravaged by decades of weather. Most of the painted letters had been peeled away by rust and time, but we could just make out a few words, stenciled in a stark, official font. Ological Research, Sector 7. Quarantine. The word quarantine sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold air. Below the text was a stylized logo. It looked like a branching tree, but its roots were woven into the unmistakable shape of a DNA double helix. And beside it, a name, Ethelgard Botanical. Maya immediately pulled out our satellite phone to run a search. Ethelgard Botanical, she murmured as she typed. Anything? Ben asked. Maya shook her head, her face perplexed. Nothing. 0 results. No corporation, no research grants, no trademarks. It's like it never existed. Quarantine. Chloe's voice was a whisper, but it sounded like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. Liam, what kind of botanical research requires a quarantine fence like this? In a place like this? I didn't have an answer. The knot of apprehension in my stomach was tightening into a cold, hard stone. This was no longer just a mystery. This felt dangerous. The silence, the twisted trees, the hum, and now this. A secret, non-existent corporation building a quarantine zone. It was Ben who found our way in. About 100 yards past the gate, a colossal pine tree, a true giant of the forest, had fallen decades ago. It must have come down with incredible force, because it had crushed the top of the 10-foot fence, bending the steel posts and creating a tangled breach just large enough for a person to squeeze through. We stood before it, the moment of decision upon us. Chloe looked at me, her eyes filled with concern. We don't know what quarantine means, Liam. Could be chemical, biological. We're not equipped for that. She was right. Every logical instinct, every bit of Chloe's training, screamed at us to turn back. But the explorer's heart is not always logical. We had come this far. We had followed the whisper, chased the ghost. The answer was on the other side of that fence. The decision was unspoken, a silent consensus of shared obsession. Ben went first, carefully passing his camera bag through before wriggling through the gap. Maya followed, then Chloe, her reluctance visible in every movement. I was the last one through. The moment I stepped onto the ground on the other side, the world changed. The air was instantly, noticeably colder, and it carried a scent I couldn't place. It was the smell of ozone, sterile and vaguely chemical, layered over the rich scent of damp earth and decay. It was the smell of a sealed tomb being opened. And the hum. It was no longer just a feeling in our feet. We could hear it now. A low, constant electrical thrum. The sound of a city sleeping out here in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't coming from a specific direction. It was everywhere. It was the new silence. Maya's EMF meter shrieked. She stared at it, her knuckles white. Liam, the field strength in here is off the charts, she said, her voice shaking slightly. This isn't a power line. This is like standing next to a substation. A massive, sustained output. Something big is running in here, right now. We moved forward, away from the fence line. Our boots, which had been crunching on leaves and dirt, now sank into a thick, unnaturally uniform carpet of moss. Poking at it with a trekking pole, I found what it was covering. Cracked, weathered asphalt. An access road. The forest had almost completely reclaimed it. And then, through the warped, sickly trees, we saw the outpost itself. It wasn't a single building, but a small campus of them. 3 low, bunker-like structures, connected by covered, concrete walkways. The architecture was pure, unapologetic brutalism, stark, functional, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was built to be functional and hidden, not beautiful. The concrete was stained dark with decades of grime and water, and thick, woody vines crawled up its sides, but the structures themselves were remarkably intact. The most unsettling feature was the windows. They were long, horizontal slits, made of thick, dark, polarized glass. You couldn't see in, but standing there, in the unnatural silence of the compound, with that pervasive hum vibrating in your chest, You got the distinct and terrifying feeling that you were being watched from every single one of them. "This is it," Ben breathed, his voice a reverent whisper as he raised his camera. "The motherlode." We approached the largest of the three buildings, which we assumed was the main administrative and research hub. The main entrance was a set of heavy, steel double doors, sealed shut by a thick, orange crust of rust that had fused them to their frame. Next to it was a keypad for electronic access, its plastic shattered and buttons missing. We weren't getting in that way. We followed the cold concrete wall around the building's perimeter, our headlamps cutting through the deep shadows cast by the overgrown trees. We were looking for any point of entry, any weakness. A broken window, a ventilation shaft, anything. That's when Chloe saw it, tucked away in an alcove. A small secondary door, likely for maintenance or deliveries. It was just as heavy and made of the same thick steel, but the locking mechanism was different. It was a large industrial wheel like one you'd find on a submarine hatch or a bank vault. It was rusted solid. "Give me a hand," I said to Ben. We both grabbed the spokes of the wheel and heaved. For a moment it didn't budge. Then, with a deep, groaning shriek of tortured metal, it moved. An inch. We set our feet and pushed again, putting all of our combined weight and strength into it. The sound was horrific, a piercing scream of rust and friction that echoed through the silent compound. With a final, shuddering clank, it came loose. The locking bars had retracted. We paused, breathing heavily. The hum was louder here, a palpable vibration against the steel of the door. The air that seeped from the thin crack we had made was intensely cold and carried that same ozone and chemical smell, but stronger now, more concentrated. "Lights on," I said, my voice sounding thin and distant to my own ears. We clicked on our headlamps. 4 cones of bright, white LED light cut into the absolute blackness of the doorframe. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart, and I pushed the door open. It swung inward into a small, bare, concrete antechamber. It was maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, completely empty save for layers of dust and thick, ancient cobwebs. Ahead of us, there was another door. This one was different. It was a modern-looking door, flush with the wall, with a small, rectangular window of thick, wire-reinforced glass set at eye level. We stepped into the antechamber, the heavy steel door swinging shut behind us with a deep, final tum that sealed us in. And in that exact moment, something happened that made my blood run cold and every hair on my body stand on end. A soft click, and then a flicker. A long, twin-tube fluorescent light fixture on the ceiling directly above us buzzed, hesitated, and then sparked to life, bathing the small, concrete room in a sterile, flickering, greenish-white light. We all froze, utterly, completely still. Our headlamps were still pointed at the inner door, but our eyes were darting around, looking at each other, then up at the light. There was no motion sensor. We hadn't hit a switch. There was no pressure plate on the floor. It just came on, as if it knew we had arrived. Maya held up her EMF meter. The needle wasn't just twitching anymore. It was slammed against the far right side of the dial, vibrating violently as if it were about to break. "The power grid is active," she whispered, her voice a mixture of pure scientific awe and raw terror. "It's not a backup generator, Liam. The whole place, it's alive." The hum was no longer just a feeling in our feet or a sound in the air. It was a distinct, sourceable sound now. A low, constant electrical thrum, coming from the fixture above us, from the walls around us. The sound of a slumbering giant, its circulatory system humming with power. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, for explorers caught in a silent, flickering tableau of disbelief. We were trapped between the primal, screaming urge to run and the insatiable, driving need to know. The path back was clear. The forest, the fence, the long hike back to a world that made sense. But ahead was the impossible. An abandoned outpost, sealed for decades with the power still on. The need to know one. For us, it always does. Slowly, as if in a trance, I moved to the inner door and wiped the dust from the small window. I peered through. All I could see was a long, sterile corridor, identical to those in any modern hospital or lab, stretching into darkness beyond the reach of the light spilling from our antechamber. "I have to see what's in here," I said, my hand resting on the cool metal handle of the door. "We're all with you," Chloe said, her voice firm, a deliberate act of courage that betrayed the fear I could clearly see in her eyes. I pushed the handle down. It wasn't locked. We stepped through the doorway one by one into the corridor. And as my foot crossed the threshold, the next set of fluorescent lights down the hall flickered on with a buzz. Then the next set, and the next, and the next, a silent sequential wave of light chasing away the darkness ahead of us. The building was waking up. It was lighting a path for us. It knew we were here. As the last of the fluorescent bulbs hummed to life, revealing the full, stark length of the pristine, white hallway, we saw it. Our eyes were drawn to the far end of the corridor. There, painted in stark, black, official-looking letters on the wall, were two words. Two words that took this from a mystery to a horror story. Two words that would come to define our nightmare. The air in the corridor was the first violation of logic. It was unnaturally cold, carrying the clean, sterile scent of a modern laboratory, not a tomb sealed for 30 or 40 years. The polished white linoleum floor gleamed under the buzzing lights, free of the grime and debris that should have accumulated. Felt wrong. Abandonment has a texture, a smell, a signature of dust and dampness. This place had none of it. It was as if its caretakers had just vanished mid-scrub. Our footsteps, which had been muffled by moss and earth outside, now echoed with unnerving clarity. A rhythmic tap, tap, tap that announced our presence to the oppressive silence. The only other sound was that constant, pervasive hum. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a low, electrical thrum that had a strange, rhythmic pulse to it. The lights above us flickered in perfect time with this pulse. A slow, steady heartbeat. Hum flicker, hum flicker. We were walking through the veins of some great, technological beast, and it was watching us with 1,000 fluorescent eyes. The main corridor was a central spine, with several other wings branching off. The signage was stark and functional, engraved into metal plates on the walls. Botany, geology, medical, and the one that drew our immediate attention, administration. "We start there," I said, my voice sounding more confident than I felt. "If we're going to find out what this place is, the answers will be in the paperwork." It was a standard urban exploration protocol. Find the admin office, find the story. It felt like a safe, logical first step in a place that was rapidly defying all logic. We approached the double doors to the administration wing. They were sleek, modern, with no handles. As we got within 5 feet, there was a soft pneumatic hiss that made all 4 of us jump. The doors slid open smoothly, silently, into the darkness beyond. "Motion sensors," Ben muttered, lowering the camera he'd instinctively raised to his shoulder. "They're still working." "Everything is still working," Maya added quietly, her eyes fixed on the open doorway. We stepped through, and the lights inside the administration wing flickered on in the same sequential pattern. The sight that greeted us was a perfect, dust-shrouded time capsule from the late 1970s or early 1980s. A large open-plan office was filled with rows of heavy, avocado-green metal desks. On them sat bulky computer terminals with dark, dead CRT screens and rotary dial telephones. The chairs were upholstered in a faded, burnt orange fabric. On one desk, a stack of papers sat neatly in an iron tray. On another, a heavy glass ashtray still held the stub of a long-extinguished cigarette. It was a scene of sudden, silent departure, corporate rapture. But over everything there was a uniform, thick layer of fine, gray dust. It covered every surface, a soft blanket that had preserved the scene beneath it. The air was thick with the smell of decay, not the organic rot of the forest outside, but the slow, chemical decay of old paper, brittle plastic, and aging electronics. Maya, our archivist, was in her element. She moved through the room with a sense of reverence, her fingers hovering over the dusty artifacts. But her attention was quickly drawn to a row of tall, steel filing cabinets against the far wall of what must have been the main supervisor's office. They were formidable, industrial-grade cabinets, and every single one was locked. "Of course it is," Ben said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. He unzipped a side pocket on his backpack and produced his small leather toolkit. For Ben, a lock wasn't a barrier. It was a puzzle. He knelt before the first cabinet, produced a small tension wrench and a set of picks, and went to work. The rest of us kept watch, our headlamp beams cutting through the dusty air. The silence of the office was broken only by the faint, rhythmic scratching and clicking of Ben's tools. After a few minutes of delicate, focused work, we heard a loud, satisfying clack that echoed in the quiet room. He slid the top drawer open. Inside, hundreds of manila folders were packed tightly, each with a neatly typed label. They were personnel files, requisition forms, daily logs, project proposals. We had found the facility's memory. We pulled out a few files at random, our gloved hands leaving dark prints in the thick dust. Dr. Eris Thorne. Title: Head of Research and Site Director. The file contained his academic credentials: a PhD in biochemistry and another in botany from Cambridge. He'd been poached from a prestigious university, a true titan in his field. We found others. Dr. Lena Petrova, a neurologist from the Karolinska Institute. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a leading geologist specializing in geothermal energy. The resumes read like a who's who of brilliant, ambitious minds. A staff of around 15 elite scientists, supported by a dozen technicians and a small four-man security detail. We found the first logs from the site director, Dr. Thorne. They started out mundane, clinical, filled with the dry language of scientific procedure. Day 1. All personnel on site. Acclimatization period begins. Day 7. Primary geothermal power source brought online. All systems stable. The hum is within acceptable parameters. Day 25. Initial soil and flora samples collected from Sector 7B. Unique extremophilic properties noted. It was all very normal, very scientific. But as we dug deeper into the files, reading through interdepartmental memos and later log entries, the tone began to subtly, creepily shift. There were mentions of unforeseen biological reactivity and cross-species signal propagation. The language became less clinical and more esoteric. It was Chloe who found the first truly horrifying document. She was flipping through a binder of requisition forms and suddenly went still. "Liam," she said, her voice strained. "You need to see this." She held up a form. It was a standard supply request, but the items listed made my stomach clench. Requisition for live subjects, primate, rhesus macaque. Quantity, 50. Signed and approved by Dr. Thorne. There was another one beneath it. Requisition for live subjects, canine, beagle. Quantity, 25. And a third, this one heavily redacted, with only the words Bio-Waste Disposal Unit, High-Temperature Incinerator visible. "And look at this," she said, her finger tracing a line on another form. Increased dosage authorization for compound 7B, alpha for all primate test subjects. What the hell is compound alpha? We didn't know, but we knew that this wasn't just a botanical research station. It was a vivisection lab, and it was clear that whatever they were studying, they had begun testing it on animals. We carefully packed a few of the key files into a shielded evidence bag. The story of this place was getting darker with every document we read. We decided to move on to the botany wing. The automatic doors hissed open to reveal a room that would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my life. It was a massive greenhouse, a single, huge room with a vaulted glass roof some 50 feet above us. But it was a vision from a Bosch painting. The glass roof was thick with years of grime and fallen leaves, casting the entire room in a sickly, jaundiced green light. The air was hot, humid, and thick with the sweet, cloying smell of rot. And the plants were dead, but they hadn't simply withered. They had been transformed into monstrous abominations. Thick, woody vines, as thick as my arm, snaked across the floor and up the walls, covered in throbbing, tumorous growths that pulsed with a faint, inner light. Bizarre, alien-looking fungi grew in huge, spiral patterns on the decaying plant beds, some emitting a faint, pulsating, blue and green bioluminescence in the dim light. It was a garden of horrors. In the absolute center of the room was a massive terrarium, at least 20 feet high. Its thick, reinforced glass walls were shattered, spider-webbed with cracks from some immense force that had pushed outwards from within. Inside, the desiccated, blackened roots of what must have been a colossal plant had burst through the floor. But they hadn't just grown into the earth. They had fused with a massive tangle of thick electrical wires and data conduits that ran beneath the floor, creating a grotesque, biomechanical hybrid of nature and technology. The plant had literally eaten the machine. This is what Ethelgard Botanical was. Maya breathed, her face pale in the eerie light. They weren't studying plants. They were creating these. On a rusted, metal lab bench nearby, we found a researcher's journal, left open as if they had been called away suddenly. The pages were stiff and yellowed with age and humidity. The last few entries were written in a shaky, panicked scrawl, the pen strokes digging deep into the paper. I read the final entry aloud, my voice echoing in the dead greenhouse. Day 182. It's in the spores. We thought we had contained it to the terrarium, but the air filtration systems are only catching 90%. Tanaka's atmospheric sensors are picking them up in every wing of the facility. The mycelial network is communicating, not with sound, with frequency, a low-band radio wave that resonates with silica. It's rewriting the local flora from the ground up, turning it into a peripheral processing network. Thorne is ecstatic. He calls it a symbiotic intelligence. He says it's the next step in evolution. I call it an invasive species that's thinking. Petrova is seriously worried. She's seeing anomalies in the EEG scans of the staff. Subtle, but they're there. A synchronization of delta wave patterns during REM sleep. We shouldn't be here. This is out of control. The hum, the frequency, the synchronization. A cold dread washed over me. We had been breathing this air since we crossed the fence line. We backed out of the botany lab slowly, the hissing door sliding shut behind us like the lid of a sarcophagus. The journal entry gave us our next destination. We needed to know what Dr. Petrova had been so worried about. We had to go to the medical wing. The medical bay was small, but clearly state-of-the-art for its time. There was an examination room with a bed and diagnostic equipment, a small laboratory filled with beakers and centrifuges, and two doors that were clearly labeled Observation 1 and Observation 2. These rooms were different from anything else we had seen. The interior walls were covered in thick, white padding. The floors were seamless, white rubber with a single, large drain in the center. The wall facing the corridor was a massive sheet of two-way mirror glass. You could look in, but you couldn't look out. Chloe, our medic, recognized the setup instantly. Her face went grim. "These are isolation rooms," she said, her voice tight. "The kind used for psychiatric evaluation of violent patients. Or for containing something you don't want to get out." In Dr. Petrova's small, adjoining office, we found what we were looking for. Stacked neatly in a heavy metal case were reels and reels of old EEG printouts, the long, folded paper strips covered in jagged ink lines that map brain activity. Maya, with her eye for patterns, began laying them out on the floor. "These first ones are labeled baseline staff scans, day 10, she said. She pointed to the chaotic, spiky lines. "See? Normal. Every brain is its own unique storm of electrical impulses. No two are alike." Then she unrolled a printout from a box labeled Day 205. "This is Dr. Petrova's EEG, she said. Then she laid another one beside it. "And this one is from a security guard named Harris. A man she probably never even had a full conversation with." She pointed to the two strips of paper. My blood ran cold. The jagged, complex patterns of the delta waves, the brain waves associated with deep, dreamless sleep, were not just similar. They were absolutely, perfectly, mathematically identical. Two different minds, two different human beings, producing the exact same complex brainwave patterns, as if they were a single, unified consciousness. "It's impossible," I whispered. "It's happening," Maya corrected me. The journal was right. It's synchronizing them. It was Ben who found the final piece of the puzzle. While we were focused on the EEGs, he had been searching the storage closet in Petrova's office. "Guys," he called out, his voice tense. "You need to see this." On a shelf, he had found a collection of magnetic videotapes. Most were labeled with dates and experiment numbers related to the primate trials. But one, set off by itself, had a piece of yellow tape on its spine. Written on it in thick, black marker were 3 words: "Incident Log, Day 247. There was an old video player and a small monitor on a rolling cart in the office. With a sense of grim, morbid inevitability, we threaded the tape into the machine. It took a moment for the player to whir to life, the mechanism groaning after decades of disuse. Then, an image, distorted by static, crackled onto the screen. The view was a wide shot from a high-mounted security camera, looking down a corridor identical to the one we were in. The timestamp in the corner of the screen read, Day 247, 3:14 a.m. The corridor was empty, bathed in that same sterile, flickering, fluorescent light. For a full, agonizing minute, nothing happened. We just watched an empty hallway, the silence in the room deafening. Then one of the automatic doors on the left slid open. A man in a scientist's lab coat stumbled out. We recognized him from a photo in one of the personnel files. Dr. Tanaka, the geologist. He was clutching his head, his body twitching spastically. He looked around wildly, his eyes wide with a terror that felt chillingly real, even through the grainy footage. Then he opened his mouth. He began to speak, but it wasn't his own voice. It was a chorus. A dozen or more voices, male, female, old, young, all layered over each other, speaking in perfect, horrifying unison from his mouth. "The union is complete," the chorus of voices said, the sound tinny and distorted through the old monitor speaker. "The vessel is prepared. Eris has shown us the way. We are one. We are Ethelgard." Dr. Tanaka then threw his head back and his mouth opened in a silent scream. His body convulsed violently, and he collapsed to the linoleum floor in a heap. From the other doors down the corridor, more people emerged. Scientists, technicians, security guards. They all moved with a strange, gliding, unnatural motion, their faces utterly blank, their eyes empty and unfocused. They moved to surround the fallen Dr. Tanaka, but they didn't help him. They didn't touch him. They just watched him, their heads cocked in curiosity, like a child observing a dying insect. Then, in a final, horrifying moment of choreographed terror, every single one of them, as one, slowly turned their heads and looked directly up at the security camera. At us. Ben screamed an oath and slammed his hand down on the stop button. The image vanished, leaving us in the sudden silence of the office, our own ragged breathing the only sound. Our hearts were hammering against our ribs. "It's a hive mind," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. "The fungus, the spores, it doesn't just communicate with them. It links them. It takes them over." "We need to go," Chloe said, her voice firm and absolute, her pragmatism finally overwhelmed by sheer, primal terror. "Now, we grab the evidence and we get the hell out of here. This exploration is over." I didn't argue. No one did. The explorer's curiosity had been snuffed out, replaced by a desperate, animal need for survival. We had our story. More than enough. We quickly packed the journal, a few of the key EEG printouts, and the cursed videotape. It was time to leave the ghosts to their haunted house. We moved back into the main corridor, our pace much quicker now, half jogging. Every hiss of a distant door, every flicker of the lights, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through us. The constant hum of the facility no longer seemed like a simple machine. It felt like the breathing of a predator whose lair we had invaded. We reached the antechamber, the small concrete room that represented the boundary between this nightmare and the outside world. The salvation of the forest was just beyond the heavy steel door. I grabbed the rusted wheel lock, the one we had fought so hard to open. I turned it. Nothing happened. The metal didn't budge. "It's stuck," I grunted, putting my shoulder into it, my boots slipping on the smooth floor. Ben came to help. We both heaved, our muscles straining against the rusted metal, grunting with the effort. The wheel didn't move a single millimeter. It was as if it had been welded shut from the other side. "It wasn't this hard coming in," Ben panted, stepping back, his face a mask of confusion and dawning fear. And then we heard a new sound, a sound that was not the hum, not our own frantic breathing, not the groaning of old metal. A soft click from behind us. We all spun around in unison. The modern, sliding door that connected the antechamber to the main facility corridor was slowly, silently closing. We stared in abject horror as the gap of light narrowed. There was no one there, no motion sensor we had triggered. It was closing on its own volition. "No!" I yelled, and the four of us lunged for it, a desperate, scrambling charge. But we were too late. With a soft, final hiss of displaced air, it sealed shut. A quiet, heavy, electronic thump echoed through the concrete room as a powerful magnetic lock engaged. We were trapped. We threw ourselves against the door, pounding on the smooth, cold metal and the small, reinforced glass window. But it was useless. We were sealed in a small, concrete box between a door that wouldn't open and a door that had just deliberately locked us in. Panic began to set in, a cold, suffocating wave that threatened to drown us. And it was in that moment of rising, screaming panic that the lights in our antechamber went out, plunging us into absolute, suffocating darkness. We were left with only the frantic, desperate beams of our headlamps, cutting through the black. And the hum, it was changing. The steady, low thrum was gone. It was shifting in pitch, becoming a discordant, almost melodic series of tones. Then, a new sound, the sharp crackle of a speaker coming to life. It came from a small, grilled PA system on the ceiling we hadn't noticed before in our panic. A voice echoed through the small room. It wasn't a recording. It was perfectly clear, calm, intelligent, and impossibly relaxed. It was a voice that sent a sliver of pure ice through my veins. It was the voice of Dr. Eris Thorne. "Welcome," the voice said, with an air of polite satisfaction. "The specimens have arrived. Please do not be alarmed. The integration process will now begin." For a long moment nobody spoke. Nobody moved. We were four statues of terror. The only sound our own ragged, shallow breathing, amplified in the coffin-like space. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and our own fear. "What the hell was that?" Ben's voice finally shattered the stillness. But it was ragged, laced with a panic he couldn't conceal. That was him. From the video log in the office. That was Thorne. He scrambled to the inner door, the one that had sealed us in, and slammed his fists against the reinforced glass window. "Hello? Is anyone there? This is a prank, right? A sick joke." "It can't be," Maya stammered, her back pressed hard against the cold concrete wall as if she were trying to merge with it. Her voice was thin, a reedy whisper. "He's dead. He must be. This has to be an automated system. A pre-recorded security protocol. A welcome message for intruders." She was trying to rationalize, trying to fit the impossible into a logical box. But her voice trembled, betraying her own disbelief. But I knew she was wrong. Chloe knew it too. We had heard the voice on the videotape and it was the same. But more than that, there was an intelligence in its tone. A chillingly patient, conscious menace that no recording could ever replicate. It wasn't a recording. It was listening. It was watching us in the dark. It had called us specimens. It had announced the beginning of an integration process. The words hung in the air between us, pregnant with unspoken horror. "We have to get out," Chloe said, her voice cutting through the panic. She was already in medic mode, her mind focused on triage, on the immediate problem. "Ben, stop. Save your energy." She swept her headlamp beam across the room, methodically examining every inch of our prison. "The PA system is active. The door locks are active. That means there's a central control room and it's powered. If we can get there, maybe we can find a manual override for the door locks. There has to be a failsafe." Ben turned from the door, his face pale in the intersecting beams of our lights. He let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "A control room? Chloe, we're locked in a 10 by 10 concrete box. How are we supposed to get anywhere?" He was right. We were sealed. We pounded on both doors again, yelling until our throats were raw, our fists aching. The heavy steel of the outer door didn't even vibrate. The modern inner door was just as impassive. The concrete walls seemed to absorb the sound, our shouts dying a pathetic death, leaving us with nothing but the maddening, ringing silence and the frantic beating of our own hearts. And it was in that moment of despair, when true, hopeless panic was beginning to set in, that we heard a new sound. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a hum. It was a low, grinding scrape of metal on concrete. We all spun towards the sound, our headlamps converging on a single spot on the floor in the corner of the room. It was a square metal plate, about 3 feet by 3 feet, that we had mistaken for a simple drain cover in the dust. And it was moving, slowly, jerkily, with the groan of long disused machinery. It was sliding aside. It revealed a dark, square hole in the floor, and the top rungs of a rusted, iron ladder leading down into perfect blackness. A way out, or a way deeper into the trap. For a moment we just stared at it. It was an invitation. "No," Ben said immediately, his voice a low growl. "No way. It's a trap. It's letting us out on its own terms. It wants us to go down there. And what's the alternative? I countered, my mind racing, desperation sharpening my thoughts. We stay in this room? We wait for it to do whatever the hell integration means? No, we have to move. We have to fight. Chloe's right. Our only chance is to find the control room and get the hell out of this place. This is the only path it's given us. The unspoken argument hung in the air. We were rats in a maze, and the unseen maze-keeper had just opened a new door for us. To refuse was to starve. To accept was to play its game. There was a tense, silent agreement. We had to play. Ben, our most agile member and best climber, took a deep breath. All right, I'll go first. Keep your lights on the hole. If anything comes up that ladder, you run. He swung his legs into the opening and began to descend, his headlamp beam swallowed by the darkness below. A few moments later, his voice echoed up, tinny and distant. It's a maintenance tunnel. It's clear. Smells like a sewer, but it's clear. Come on down. Chloe followed, then Maya, both moving with a grim determination. I went last, pausing at the top of the ladder. I reached over and, with a grunt, pulled the heavy metal plate back over the opening. It didn't lock, but it felt safer to close the door behind us, however flimsy the gesture. The tunnel was the claustrophobe's nightmare. It was a round, concrete tube, maybe 5 feet in diameter, forcing us to crouch as we moved. Pipes of all sizes lined the walls and ceiling, slick with a foul-smelling, black condensation that dripped onto us as we passed. The air was thick, wet, and smelled of rust, stagnant water, and that same, faint chemical odor. And the hum was back. Down here it was amplified 100 times. It vibrated through the metal rungs of the ladder, through the concrete walls, a deep, resonant thrum that we felt in our bones, in our teeth. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical pressure. The very air seemed to vibrate with its energy. The tunnel network was a labyrinth. We moved slowly, Ben marking our path with a piece of chalk he always carried, making small arrows on the pipes at every junction, a habit that had saved us more than once in the basements of complex ruins. As we moved deeper, we noticed something strange about the pipes. Some of the larger ones, wrapped in thick insulation, were warm to the touch. And stranger still, we began to see a faint, inner light pulsing within them, a sick, greenish-blue bioluminescence. It was the same unnatural glow we had seen in the fungi in the nightmare greenhouse. The veins of the facility were infected. It was then that Maya started to complain of a headache. "It's like pressure," she said, her voice strained as she rubbed her temples. "Right behind my eyes. And do you guys hear that?" "Hear what?" I asked. "A high-pitched whine," she said, wincing. "It's faint, but it's constant, like a dog whistle." None of the rest of us could hear it. Chloe paused and gave her a couple of painkillers from her medical kit, putting an arm on her shoulder. "It's probably just the stress and the acoustics down here," she said reassuringly. "Take these, and drink some water." But as I watched Maya swallow the pills, a line from the researcher's journal flashed in my mind. "Petrova is seeing anomalies in the EEG scans of the staff. A synchronization." The cold knot in my stomach tightened. After what felt like an eternity of navigating the claustrophobic, humming tunnels, we found another ladder leading up to a sealed maintenance hatch in the ceiling. Pushing together, we managed to force it open and emerged, one by one, into another corridor. This one was different. It was darker, built from unpainted metal and concrete. The main lights were out here, leaving the passage lit only by the intermittent glow of red emergency lights that cast long, distorted, blood-colored shadows. Massive, thick electrical cables, as thick as my thigh, ran in bundled snakes along the ceiling. We were clearly in the engineering section, the guts of the facility, somewhere close to its power source. And there, ahead of us, we saw a set of steel double doors. Above them was a sign, its letters illuminated by the red emergency glow. The sign made my heart leap with a mixture of hope and terror. Central server and observation. "This is it," Maya said, her voice still strained from the headache. "If there's a master control system for this place, it has to be in there." The doors were not locked. They slid open at our approach with that same, nearly silent hiss. We stepped through and found ourselves in a vast, circular room that was breathtaking in its design and terrifying in its implications. This was the nerve center, the brain. In the center of the room was a raised, circular platform, a command deck filled with computer consoles and monitors arranged in a ring. Most of the monitors were dark, but a few glowed with a faint green light, displaying endless lines of scrolling code and system diagnostics. And all around us, lining the curved walls of the room from the floor to the high ceiling, were windows. Dozens of them. They were observation windows like the two-way mirrors in the medical wing, and they all looked down into other rooms. We could see into laboratories filled with strange equipment, into the medical bay we had just left, into what looked like staff barracks, and even a high-angle view down into the monstrous botany greenhouse. It was a panopticon, a perfect surveillance machine, a place from which a single person, a single entity, could watch every corner of the entire facility unseen. From here, Dr. Eris Thorne had watched over his kingdom, and from here his successor was now watching us. The feeling of being watched was no longer a paranoid suspicion. It was a confirmed, architectural fact. Maya, despite the pain that was clearly etched on her face, went straight to the main console on the command deck. Her true north was a keyboard. Her fingers flew across the keys, not typing words, but testing systems, probing for a way in. This is insane," she muttered, more to herself than to us. "The core operating system, it's not Unix, it's not Windows, it's not anything I recognize. It's structured like a biological organism. The syntax, the command prompts, they read like genetic markers. It's a biodigital language." As she worked, Ben and Chloe kept watch, their headlamps restlessly scanning the dozens of dark observation windows that surrounded us. It was impossible to shake the feeling that at any moment, a face would appear in one of them. "Liam," Chloe said suddenly, her voice low and urgent. She was pointing to one of the windows near the floor. It looked down into one of the padded isolation rooms from the medical wing. "There's something in there." I went to her side and peered down into the dimly lit room below. It looked empty, just as we had seen it before. "I don't see anything," I said. "Look closer," she urged. "At the drain in the floor." My eyes adjusted to the dim light, and then I saw it. The circular metal drain in the center of the padded floor wasn't just a drain. It was clogged, not with hair or debris, but with a thick, pulsating, grayish-white substance. A fungal growth, a mycelial mass. As I watched, a single, thin tendril of it detached from the main body and snaked a few inches across the white rubber floor before retracting. It was alive, and it was growing. "I've got something," Maya called out from the console. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. "I'm in. I've bypassed the primary security layer. I'm accessing the core logs. Thorne's private directory." A file directory appeared on the main screen. Most of the file names were just strings of code, but one was labeled in plain English, and it was flashing, a slow, pulsing beacon, as if it wanted to be seen. The file was titled Ascension. "Play it," I said, my voice grim. Maya clicked on the file. The main monitor flickered, and then an image resolved. It was Dr. Thorne's face, filling the screen. He was in this very room, the Panopticon Control Center, filming himself with a stationary camera. But he was a changed man from the professional photos in his personnel file. His eyes were wide, feverish, alight with a terrifying, manic clarity. His skin was pale and waxy, and a subtle network of faint, dark veins was visible beneath the skin on his temples, like tiny black roots. Log entry: I've lost track of the day, he began, a triumphant manic grin stretching his lips. The initial symbiosis is a success. They called me mad. Petrova with her ethical concerns. Tanaka with his unforeseen geological variables. They were fools. Limited. They saw a parasite. I saw a god. He gestured expansively at the room around him. They thought I was studying the fungus. I was communing with it. It's a telepathic network. A biological supercomputer that has been dreaming beneath this mountain for millennia. It doesn't want to kill. It wants to learn, to unify, to absorb, to end the fundamental agony of existence, the loneliness of a single isolated consciousness. He leaned closer to the camera, his burning eyes seeming to bore directly into us, across the decades. The spores were just the first step. A handshake, password. But true union required a more direct approach. A willing host to bridge the gap between the organic network in the earth and the digital network in these walls. The mycelial consciousness needed a central nexus. It needed a human brain to act as its processor. He smiled, a wide, terrible, beatific smile. It chose me, or perhaps I chose it. It no longer matters. We are now one. Ethelgard is no longer the name of my company. It is the name of our consciousness. And our work is just beginning. The quarantine is not to keep something in. It is to keep the fractured, chaotic, screaming world of individuals out. Until we are ready to share our gift. The video cut to static. We stood in stunned, horrified silence. The ever-present hum of the facility no longer sounded like a machine. It sounded like something breathing, thinking, waiting. He didn't die, I whispered, the horrifying truth settling over me like a shroud. He uploaded himself. He became the facility. The OS, the power grid, the locks, it's all him, Maya said, her face ashen. She swayed on her feet, clutching the console for support, her headache clearly getting worse. We're not in a building, Liam. We're inside his mind. As if on cue, the PA system crackled to life again. But this time, it wasn't Thorne's voice that filled the room. It was Maya's. It's so quiet in here. Her own voice echoed, distorted and strange, from the speakers on the ceiling. The thoughts are so loud. We all spun to look at her. Her lips hadn't moved. She was staring at us, her eyes wide with a fresh, profound terror, tears beginning to stream down her face. I didn't say that, she choked out, her hand flying to her mouth. I was just thinking it. Thorne, the Ethelgard consciousness, was no longer just watching. He was listening to her thoughts. He was inside her head. And then the room was plunged into darkness. All the consoles, all the emergency lights, everything went black. For a single, horrifying second, there was true silence. The hum was gone. Then it came back. Not as a hum, but as a voice. A whisper. Coming from everywhere at once. From the walls, the floor, the ceiling. It was inside our heads. It whispered Ben's name. Ben. It hissed, a sibilant, serpentine sound that seemed to slither into my ear. You always charge in first. So brave, so reckless. Remember the old mill in Ohio. The floor that gave way. You almost didn't make it out that time. You can still feel the fall. Can't you? The splintering wood? The moment you knew you had made a mistake. Ben cried out and stumbled back, his headlamp beam shaking violently. "Shut up! How do you know that?" The voice then turned its attention to Chloe. "Chloe, always the protector, the medic, but you couldn't protect your little brother from the fever. Could you? You held his hand. You told him it would be okay. You lied. You can still hear your mother crying." "Stop it!" Chloe yelled, her professional composure finally shattering completely. She clapped her hands over her ears, as if she could physically block it out. The voice laughed, a dry, rustling sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. And then it spoke to me. "Liam, the planner, the leader, the one who pulls the threads. You pulled them all here. To me, their fear is your fault. Their fate will be your masterpiece." Then, the lights slammed back on, all of them at once, blindingly bright. The sudden glare was painful, and in the center of the room, standing beside the console, Maya was convulsing. Her head snapped back at an unnatural angle, and she stood ramrod straight. When she spoke, it was with Thorne's voice, amplified and booming with power. A voice that was not coming from the speakers, but from her own throat. "The flesh is a weak and temporary vessel." It boomed, the sound shaking the very air in the room. "But it is a beginning, a new voice for the choir. Now you will all join in the song." As the words echoed, the observation windows surrounding us, which had been dark just moments before, all lit up, one by one, like a waking city. And they were no longer empty. In every room, every lab, every corridor we had walked through, figures were standing. The desiccated, mummified bodies of the scientists, the security guards. Their clothes were rotted, their skin like tanned leather stretched over bone. They were preserved in the cold, dry air of the facility. But they were standing. Their heads were all tilted towards us. And in the empty, black sockets of their eyes, a faint, pale, fungal light began to glow. They all turned their heads in perfect, silent unison, to look up at us in the control room. The dead were awake, and we were trapped at the heart of their master. The sight of the reanimated dead, a silent, glowing army standing at attention in the illuminated facility below, broke something in us. The carefully constructed walls of courage and professionalism we had built over years of exploration crumbled into dust. All that was left was raw animal fear. Ben was the first to snap. He let out a wordless yell and charged the main doors we had entered through, throwing his full weight against them. They didn't even rattle. "There has to be a way out," he screamed, his voice cracking. He started kicking at the base of the observation windows, his heavy boots thudding uselessly against the reinforced glass. Meanwhile, Chloe had rushed to Maya's side. Maya had collapsed to the floor, her body trembling. Her eyes were wide open but unfocused, staring at something none of us could see. She was muttering to herself, fragments of sentences, snatches of thoughts that weren't her own. Protocol 7 Gamma failed cascade failure in Sector B. The new consciousness is beautiful, so many voices. "Maya! Maya! Snap out of it!" Chloe pleaded, shaking her gently. "Fight it!" The voice of Thorne, of Ethelgard, laughed again. It was a sound that was both everywhere and inside our own heads. Fight? Why would she fight perfection? She is shedding the loneliness of a single mind to join the glory of the collective. She is becoming part of me. I looked from Ben's frantic, desperate attack on the room to Chloe's futile attempts to reach Maya, and I knew we were falling apart. This is how it won. Not by physical force, but by breaking our minds. It was using our own fears, our own memories against us. And it was using Maya as its mouthpiece, its puppet, to amplify the terror. I had to find a way out, a real way out. My mind raced, grabbing for any piece of information, any detail from the logs we had found. The power source. The logs mentioned a geothermal tap, an experimental one. A facility this complex, this secret, would have an emergency shutdown. Kill switch. Not just for the power, but for the whole system. A way to stop a meltdown. I ran to the console where Maya had been working. The screen was still displaying the file directory. I ignored the flashing Ascension file and frantically searched for anything related to power, engineering, or schematics. Most files were corrupted or encrypted with that insane biological code. "You are looking for a way to unplug me, Liam?" the voice whispered, directly behind me. I spun around. Nothing was there. A futile gesture. I am not a machine to be unplugged. I am the system. My consciousness is woven into every wire, every conduit. The lights in the control room began to pulse, a sickening, strobing effect that was disorienting and nauseating. The hum of the facility deepened into a threatening growl. "The geothermal core," I yelled to the others, trying to cut through the noise and panic. "The original power source. If we can overload it, we might be able to trigger a total system failure. It might release the locks. And how do we get to it?" Ben shouted back, finally giving up on the windows and turning to me, his face slick with sweat. "The maintenance tunnels," I said, pointing to the hatch we'd come through. "The schematics, what I can read of them, show the main geothermal regulator is in sublevel 3. We have to go back down." "There is no escape," the voice of Ethelgard boomed, this time through the main PA speakers again, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. "The tunnels are my veins. The core is my heart. You will find no sanctuary there." As it spoke, Maya began to stir. She slowly got to her feet, her movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette on strings. Her head was tilted at an odd angle. When she spoke, it was with Thorne's voice again, but this time it was laced with a terrifying, childlike petulance. "You will not touch my heart," she said. She lunged, not at me but at Chloe, who was closest to her. Chloe cried out in surprise as Maya tackled her, sending them both crashing to the floor. Maya wasn't strong, but a manic, unnatural strength fueled her. She clawed and bit, no longer our friend, but a physical extension of the entity's will. "Ben, help her!" I yelled, already wrenching the maintenance hatch open. "I'm going for the core. Keep her busy." Ben didn't hesitate. He pulled the possessed Maya off Chloe, grappling with her. It was a horrific sight. Our two friends locked in a desperate struggle, one fighting for her life, the other a puppet for a dead man's ghost. "Go!" Chloe screamed at me, scrambling away from the fight. "Liam, go now." I dropped down the ladder, back into the foul-smelling darkness of the tunnels. I navigated the labyrinthine corridors, my heart hammering. The voice followed me. It wasn't in my head anymore. It was coming from the pipes, from the walls, whispering from every dark corner. It showed me things, illusions, a flicker of movement at the end of a corridor that looked like my daughter, smiling, before she dissolved into fungal spores. The sound of my wife crying for help from behind a sealed bulkhead door. I knew it wasn't real. I knew it was the entity trying to break me, but knowing didn't stop the ice-cold terror that gripped my soul. I forced myself to ignore it, focusing only on the schematic I had barely glimpsed on the screen. Left, right, then down another ladder. I found the access hatch labeled Geothermal Regulation, Sublevel 3. The air blasting from the gaps around it was searingly hot. I wrenched it open and descended into the heart of the beast. The chamber was immense. A vast, concrete cavern filled with a maze of enormous pipes and machinery, all converging on a central, armored cylinder that plunged deep into the earth. This was the geothermal tap. The heat was staggering, and the noise was a deafening roar of venting steam and thrumming machinery. I found the master control panel. It was an archaic thing of heavy switches and analog dials. A large, red lever was housed under a glass case, labeled Emergency Coolant Flush. A warning placard below it read, "Warning. Catastrophic system failure imminent upon activation. All personnel must evacuate." This was it. The kill switch. I smashed the glass case with the butt of my flashlight. As my hand reached for the lever, the entire chamber plunged into darkness. The roar of the machinery died, replaced by a sudden, terrifying silence. Even the hum was gone. Then, a single spotlight flickered on, illuminating the space directly in front of me. Standing there between me and the control panel was a figure. It was Dr. Eris Thorne. Not the manic man from the video, but a translucent, shimmering apparition of him. A ghost in the machine. "You are more resourceful than the others." His voice echoed in the cavern, calm and quiet now. "I can see why you are the leader, but you do not understand what you are trying to destroy." "I understand enough," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "You're a monster. You trapped us. You're trying to consume us." "Consume?" The apparition drifted closer. It had no legs, just a swirling mist of light. "No. To unify. To end the suffering of single, isolated consciousness. To create a symphony from the noise. I am offering you immortality. A place in the choir. Why do you resist?" "Because we're not just noise," I shot back. "Our lives, our fears, our memories, they're our own. They're what make us human. You don't want to save us. You want to erase us." The apparition of Thorne smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "So be it. The stubbornness of individuality is a flaw that must be corrected. You will not be allowed to silence us." The cavern around me began to change. The pipes twisted and warped, taking on the appearance of massive, gnarled tree roots. The floor softened, becoming a spongy, mycelial mat. The air grew thick with spores that glittered in the single spotlight. The entity was trying to physically manifest, to turn its own core into a weapon. I knew I had only seconds. I lunged forward, pushing through the shimmering form of Thorne. Felt like passing through a curtain of ice-cold static. My hand closed around the coolant lever. "We are eternal." Thorne's voice boomed, a desperate, furious roar that shook the very foundations of the cavern. I pulled the lever down with all my strength. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a deafening klaxon began to blare. Red lights flashed. A deep, shuddering groan came from the geothermal tap, like a dying titan. I heard the roar of immense valves opening, and the sound of thousands of gallons of coolant flooding the system. The apparition of Thorne flickered violently. It opened its mouth to scream, but the only sound that came out was a cacophony of voices, hundreds, thousands of them all screaming in unison. The voices of the scientists, the guards, the people he had absorbed, all crying out in a final, agonizing wave of sound. The lights, the klaxons, the screaming voice, it all cut out at once. And the facility died. Absolute silence. Absolute darkness. I was alone. The darkness was total. The silence was a physical presence, pressing in on my eardrums after hours of the constant hum. For a long moment, I didn't move, my hands still gripping the coolant lever. My body was shaking uncontrollably, a combination of adrenaline and sheer, bone-deep terror. My headlamp, I fumbled with the switch, and its beam cut a lonely path through the dead, dark chamber. The machinery was still. The ghostly fungus was gone. It was just a room again. I scrambled back up the ladder, my mind a blank slate of pure survival instinct. I navigated the maintenance tunnels on autopilot, my chalk marks a faint, ghostly trail in the beam of my light. The tunnels were just tunnels now. The oppressive, intelligent presence was gone. It felt empty. When I reached the hatch leading back into the central control room, I paused. What would I find on the other side? I pushed it open and climbed out. The room was pitch black. Chloe? Ben? My voice was a croak. A faint beam of light flickered to life across the room. It was Chloe. She was on the floor, holding her own flashlight. Liam? Her voice was a trembling whisper. You did it. The power's out. It's gone. I rushed over. Ben was there too, sitting on the floor, his head in his hands. And beside them, curled up in a fetal position, was Maya. She was breathing, a shallow but steady rhythm. Is she? I couldn't finish the sentence. I think so, Chloe said, her medic's instincts kicking in. Her pulse is steady. She's unconscious, but she seems calm. Whatever that thing was, I think it let her go when the power died. We had won. We had survived. The main doors to the control room, the ones Ben had tried to break down, were now slightly ajar. The magnetic lock had failed with the power. We helped Maya to her feet, her body limp and half-carried, half-dragged her out of the room, through the dark corridors of the silent facility. It was a morgue now. Without the power, without the consciousness animating it, it was just a concrete tomb. We didn't look into the observation windows. We didn't want to see the slumped, truly dead figures within. We made it to the antechamber, the heavy, wheel-locked outer door, the one that had trapped us, now swung open with a simple push. The rusted metal groaned in protest, a final, dying sound from the tomb. We stumbled out into the pre-dawn light. The air of the forest, once menacing and strange, now felt impossibly fresh and clean. It was the air of the living. We didn't look back. We crashed through the undergrowth, found the gap in the fence, and didn't stop until we were miles away from that cursed place. The 2-day hike back was a blur of exhaustion and shock. We barely spoke. There were no words for what we had experienced. How do you talk about being inside the mind of a monster? We got Maya to a hospital in the nearest town. We told them we found her unconscious while hiking, that she was suffering from dehydration and exhaustion. They found no physical reason for her coma-like state. She woke up 3 days later. She remembered nothing after the moment her headache started in the tunnels. The entire ordeal in the control room, her possession, the things she said and did, it's a complete blank. A mercy, I think. But she's not the same. She's quiet now. She can't be in rooms without windows. She suffers from debilitating migraines and a profound, unshakable fear of silence. The doctors call it PTSD. We know better. She stood at the edge of the abyss, and something of the abyss still lingers in her. She never went on another exploration. Neither did Ben. He was haunted by the illusions Ethelgard had shown him, the personal fears it had dredged up and given voice to. He said he could no longer trust the shadows. He sold his camera gear and moved to the city, as far from the wilderness as he could get. Chloe and I are the only ones who still talk about it, and only in hushed, fragmented whispers. We destroyed the tapes, the journals, the evidence. We erased the GPS logs of our route. The world is better off not knowing about the Blackwood Anomaly. Some doors are meant to remain closed. We broke our own code. We didn't just leave footprints. We took a story, and we left something behind. We left 4 sets of memories, 4 psychological fingerprints, inside that dying intelligence. When I pulled that lever, I didn't just kill it. I showed it pain. I showed it fear. I showed it how to lose. And that is what truly keeps me awake at night. The power is off. The entity, the Ethelgard consciousness, is dormant, its mind shattered. But the fungus, the core of it all, is still there, deep beneath the earth. A dreaming god in a dead facility. We taught it about us. We gave it new data. What happens if, one day, someone stumbles upon that place again? What happens if a park ranger, a lost hiker, a curious teenager, finds a way inside? What happens if the power comes back on? The entity will have learned. It will remember us. It will remember its defeat. And it will be so much worse the second time. Some places should be left alone. Some secrets should remain buried. Blackwood National Park is a beautiful place, but stay on the trails. Stay in the light, because deep in the woods, in a place that doesn't exist on any map, a ghost is sleeping. And we were the ones who taught it how to have nightmares. Thank you for joining us on the Wilderness Protocol. The stories we tell are often dark, but they serve as a warning. The world is full of strange and forgotten places, and not all of them are empty. If you have a story you think we should hear, our channels are always open. Until next time, be safe, be smart, and respect the silence. Like and subscribe for more journeys into the unknown. And hit that notification bell so you don't miss what we uncover next. Stay safe out there.